Welcome to this edition of our Get Untethered Hangout on Air. I am Stacey Harmon, and I'm here with my co-host and co-author, Kristi Willis. And today we've got a special guest, which we will introduce you to as well. But let me just give you a little bit of background on kind of what's going to happen. We are recording this session, so it'll be available on replay when you want to review our structures and strategies that we're going to be sharing with you today. We are talking today about taming your taxes with Evernote, and it's February, and it's time to start thinking about how to ease the stress of taxes for April or October, whichever you pursue as probably a self-employed individual, which many of you who watch us are. But there's tips for everybody in what we're going to cover today, and we wanted to let you know that you can reach all of us on Twitter, and if you use the hashtag #GetUntethered, we will be kind of following the conversation and responding to you there. We'll make sure you have our Twitter handles in the slides that kind of get going. We also want you to know there's a Q&A pod on the right-hand side, so we're going to try, we've built in time to answer your questions during this session, and if you type them in there, we will do our best to get your question answered as we go through the presentation. Also, stay tuned at the end for a special offer. We've got a couple special offers today, actually. So we've got some discounts for you, and Kristi and I kind of changed our strategy, so we're not offering as many discounts throughout the year. So today is one of our gems, and would love to have you participate, and our guest has some great offers for you as well. So stay tuned to the end for those. But with that, I'm going to jump right into the slide deck to do the introduction and kind of show you guys what we're going to be talking about today. As I mentioned, it's going to be taming your taxes with Evernote, and we're going to go through 3 case studies where Kristi and I are both going to illustrate kind of how we do it, and then our special guest Chris is going to outline his philosophy for it. Just to give you, for those of you who are new to our Hangouts, Stacey and I'm Stacey. Kristi and I those are our Twitter handles, and we are Evernote ambassadors as well as Evernote Business Certified Consultants, and just general Evernote lovers. We also co-wrote a book called Untethered with Evernote that is available at Evernote.com. Sorry, I have the URLs flipped there. At Evernote.com, you'll see the image that's on the right. But you can also get it at GetUntethered.com, the EPUB, PDF, MOBI, or print version. So in it, we go through 15 workflows that really show you how we as independent entrepreneurs utilize Evernote to make our lives so much easier. And one of those is about the receipt and expense management process, which we're going to expand on greatly today. And then there's obviously other elements that will assist you and show you how we really maximize Evernote for our businesses. I'd like to introduce our special guest, Chris Remus. He is the author of Tax Pain Relief, and you can reach him on Twitter at RollingHereNow. We are so excited to have Chris here today. He approached us, and it was just one of those moments where it's like, oh, you are so like-minded, and we love your ideas and what you're doing, and it was just an easy kind of conversation. Chris is also self-employed. He's a solopreneur who really works on operations execution, technology operations execution, project management, patent commercialization, and patent diligence for companies. So that's kind of his day job, but he is probably noticed, like many of you, and definitely Kristi and I, that the idea of taxes was really dreadful. It caused a lot of stress. There's a lot of information you need to gather and all of those kinds of things. And he was spending way too much time collecting his forms, statements, receipts. Can anybody identify? Probably. So leading, obviously, to stress and other important, getting behind on a lot of important things during the tax season. So he actually documented his process because he used Evernote and a resulting system to kind of solve this problem for him. And it's called Tax Pain Relief, and he's going to kind of give you an introduction to that process today. And then Kristi and I are going to follow that up with explaining kind of how we do it. And you can see the similarities as well as the differences, because there are nuances that are specific to each of our situations, and we hope that'll provide great fodder for you to actually deploy and tackle your taxes with Evernote. So having said that, before we get into Chris's system, let's just address why we're talking about this. I mean, how many of you can identify with this picture where you know that it's February, and you've got all your 1099s, and now it's like, okay, April 15th is looming, and it's just a headache, right? It's just a headache. And you might have paper, you might have shoeboxes of data, you have statements, you've got all of this stuff, and you have a looming deadline, and it lingers in your world. And if you're like us, you also have clients that you're trying to service and worlds that you're trying to manage and personalize. And having a system is really something that can cause relief for all of this stress and paper and problems that the idea of taxes really brings about. As well as, the fear of an audit, right? We can't underestimate the importance of being prepared and having a system to be able to defend, the tax situation and the taxes that you file. So Evernote has proved to be an outstanding tool to develop systems for all three of us. And with that, I'm going to let Chris kind of take it over and show his system and say a little bit about why you have decided to write this PDF. And just so you know, both Kristi and I have looked at it, and it's an outstanding document that really details out how you can implement this kind of system for yourself and find some relief. So with that, I'd like to say welcome to Chris. And since I've got the slide deck up, if you'd like me to advance it, I'm happy to take that for you. But with that, I'd like to introduce Chris Remus.
Thanks, Stacey, and thanks, Kristi, for having me. I'm really happy to be here, and hopefully share some of the relief that I felt by putting tax pain relief in place for me. And and thanks for everybody for joining today as well. It's funny, as Stacey was going through the reasons that we're here talking today, I felt my heart start to beat a little bit faster. And as I look at slide 7, if we could go there, I can actually feel my kind of anxiety start to build. So I thought I would get started this morning by talking a little bit about what taxes used to feel like for me. And then from there, I'll talk a little bit about what they feel like now, since I've been able to put tax pain relief in place for myself, and talk a little bit about how I did it. So if we could go back to slide 7 for a minute.
Sure.
So this is what taxes used to feel like for me. That's me in the middle with a huge headache. And I think a lot of us may feel this way in some different shape or form. We have financial statements up on the top left, credit card statements and transactions in the middle, and then, like Stacey mentioned, receipts, they're on the right. And I felt like I was doing a really poor job collecting the information I would need to collect, process it, get it to my accountant, who you can see on the right, who's inevitably asking me for more information because I'd always forget something. And then, again, as Stacey mentioned, on the left you have that looming fear of Uncle Sam, or in my case, New York State, and as a bonus, I also get to file in New York City. So I have 3 people that are basically telling me to not screw up, or I might make a costly mistake. So this just really resulted in a lot of pain for me at tax time in the form of stress, tension, and anxiety. And this didn't just happen once a year. It didn't just happen in April. It didn't just happen in October. It would happen all year round, because I do work for myself. I have business taxes to attend to. So it wasn't just kind of like a one hit and then I could go away and feel a little bit better. This was something that was chasing me all year round. So I decided something had to be done, and as a result, we can look at slide 8. And this is essentially what taxes feel like now. They feel a lot better, as I hope that the image here conveys. I also started meditating, and I've been doing yoga for a while, so I thought the image of me in the middle there was kind of appropriate. The biggest thing you'll see here is that rather than all this information bombarding me, as you saw in the previous slide, and just causing me all that pain, now all the information is coming into this database that you see in the middle. And it's probably no surprise that this database is a lot better suited for processing all this information and making sense of the information than my own brain was. And not to mention the database itself can't experience stress, anxiety, and tension, so it's even much better suited to handle all this information and the onslaught of information that we all experience when it comes to figuring out what information we need to file our taxes and how to process it and what to do with it. So as a result of the system, I'm feeling a lot better about taxes. I'm feeling a lot better that I'm getting my accountant on the right the information he needs when he needs it. I'm not sure that he really thinks I'm the best, but I guess here's to hoping. And then on the left side, again, a little bit of an exaggeration. I don't think Uncle Sam has ever thanked me for sending him money, but that is what it is. What I'm trying to convey here is that, by substituting the database for my brain, essentially, I'm feeling a lot better about taxes in that I'm getting the information my accountant needs to him in a format that's easier for him to handle. And as a result, when I do come to file, I'm feeling much more confident about the filings in terms of not forgetting any key deductions, for example, and then just really that the chances of me making a mistake in my filings have gone down pretty dramatically because I'm a lot more confident that the information I'm collected is the information I need to file correctly. So I'll move on now to talk a little bit about how I did this. So how did I go from this constant headache to feeling a little bit more zenful and peaceful about tax time? And I did it by putting in place what you'll see in slide 10, what I've come to call tax pain relief. So after years and years of kind of putting myself through this pain, I just got to the point where I was thinking to myself, I really like putting productivity systems in place. I like to automate systems as well, and I use tools. I've been using Evernote since 2008, and it occurred to me that there really has to be a better way to do this, and by doing this, I can just make tax time a lot easier for myself. So this year, in April, I was on the way out the door to vacation, and my wife works in a school, and as a result, her vacations are pretty set in stone. And unfortunately for me, they usually coincide with tax deadlines. So year after year, I'd find myself calling from a hotel room, talking to my accountant, and just going through that whole pain cycle, essentially. So this year, once I had the system in place, it literally took me about 30 minutes to get everything I needed to get organized, zipped up, and over to my accountant, literally on the way out the door to the airport. And I'd say conservatively, this same work used to take me 8, 12, 16 hours over the course of a few painful weeks. And this year it took me less than 30 minutes. And at that point, the power of tax pain relief became clear to me, and I decided to document the system in the hopes that by documenting the system I could share this relief with as many other people as possible. And that's why I feel fortunate to be here sharing this with you. So here's how I did it in detail. I talk about 6 steps that I'll walk you through quickly here. The first step, of course, is setting up Evernote. The database that we saw back on slide 8 is actually Evernote. As I mentioned, I've been using Evernote since 2008, and as I imagine many of us listening as well just find it to be a very useful tool in a lot of different ways. So I started thinking to myself, if I'm going to use a database, why not use something tried and true? And I started to use Evernote for that purpose. So in step 1 of the tax pain relief process, I set up 2 notebooks in Evernote. I set up 1 notebook for my personal taxes, and I set up 1 notebook for my business taxes each year. So for 2014, I'll have a personal tax notebook, and I'll have a 2014 business tax notebook. If you have to have more than 1 business, I think it's a good idea to then have 1 notebook essentially for each business that you manage. And that's really it. I don't go into much more complicated organization. I kind of let Evernote do what it's good at, so I don't necessarily get into tagging. I don't try and have multiple notebooks for different types of documents. The key here for me that has really made this work is just making sure that I set up the notebooks, and that way the notebooks are there for me to use throughout the year. And as long as I get the information into the notebooks, that's about 90% of the battle. So in step 2, I begin to connect external systems, and I do this to help automate collection of documentation that I don't have to touch. For example, here in step 2, I use a system called FileThis. And if you're not familiar with FileThis integrates with Evernote, and it automatically pulls financial statements from banks, credit cards, other online retail accounts that you may have, and pulls PDF statements each month related to your account, and then adds them to Evernote notebooks. So that's a nice way to automate the collection of financial statements so you don't have to touch them. In a similar way, with Expensify, I use Expensify to automate receipt collection and generation for my expenses. So each month or quarter, depending on the activity of the business, I have an assistant go into Expensify, generate expense reports for the business. And one of the nice things about Expensify is that it also generates electronic receipts. So you now have a paperless copy of most of the receipts you need. And for any receipts that weren't generated electronically, my assistant tells me what to keep, and then I can toss the rest. So moving on to step 4, this part gets to be a bit manual. As we know, Evernote is really good at making it easy to get different types of information in different formats into the notebooks. So this is where I start to get involved, in that anytime I receive a tax document throughout the year, the first thing I do is I make sure to get it into my notebook. So that's either with a web, with a scanner. You could also do it by emailing the document directly into your notebook. So the key here again is just as you receive this information throughout the year, take 2 minutes, get it into the system that's already set up, so that way at the end of the year everything's there and waiting for you. And finally in step 5, as I mentioned, you really don't see me yet in the picture. I do some work getting the documents manually into the system like I mentioned in the previous step. However, my assistant from Zirtual, based here in the US on the right side, works with my bookkeeper in India on the left, and they basically have access to Evernote and my notebooks, and depending on your level of comfort with sharing sensitive data, you could either share it with one or both. I personally let my Zirtual assistant in the US access Evernote, and then she takes the relevant information that the bookkeeper in India needs and sends it over to him. But the key and the nice thing here is that because of Evernote's sharing capabilities, people who are helping me get done what I need to do can do that without me really ever having to touch the process. And finally, there's me. Finally, I show up kind of late in the game, which is really helpful here. Like I mentioned before, what I really like is the fact that I really don't have to get involved, and despite my best efforts to procrastinate, everything's getting done in the background when it needs to. So this system also kind of helps me help myself in a way. So that way, when I do get around to doing taxes, the information I need is right there. It's more or less organized in the way I need it organized. The people who have needed it throughout the year have had it and have done what they need to do with it. And then all it is up to me to collect that information, share it with my accountant, taking the burden of the information collection process off of me, and it frees me up to make the kind of more important tax planning decisions that I need to make. And again, by doing this, I'm still a little stressed at the time, but nothing like I used to be leading up to the process, and I'm feeling a lot better that my accountant has what he needs when he needs it, maybe even a little bit earlier. And as a result, when I'm filing, I'm feeling a lot more comfortable that I've done a good job filing than I used to. And here's a quick rundown of the different tools that I use. I mentioned the scanner. There are a number of different mobile device applications you can use. I personally use a Doxy Go as a standalone hardware scanner for anything more than 5 to 10 pages that I might need to scan. Otherwise, I understand Stacey uses the new Evernote scannable app that I'm excited to try as well. And then FileThis and Expensify that you see at the bottom I use to automate financial report and expense receipt collection. Finally, of course, Evernote sits at the middle and makes it all work. And then there's some other systems I use like QuickBooks and FreshBooks and online banking that I haven't quite integrated into the system. But over time, now that I have the foundation in place, I'm excited to pull more functions into this and make it even more of a hands-off process. And that's tax paying relief.
That's awesome. So there's some interesting, first of all, if you have any questions, now's a great time to put those into the Q&A module there. We'll be happy to answer them. Chris can answer them as well. But a really good overview of how Evernote plays a central role. And I love the fact that it pulled you out of the process, right? That's key.
Well, that's been one of the biggest sources of relief here, in that, if I'm going to procrastinate, which I still do, at least when I finally get around to doing what I need to, the information's already there. So that, that just alone, kind of separating me from kind of causing more pain for myself, has been a huge benefit.
And then talk a little bit about how what you just went through is expanded on in tax payment relief.
Correct. So essentially there are 3 products. There's a quick start guide, which I've put together and I make freely available for people, and probably a number of people who know these systems, who are pretty familiar with online productivity systems. And my hope there is that people can download the quick start guide and probably even set something like this or very similar up for themselves. So that's the intent for the quick start guide. If you want to save a little bit of time and kind of not have to figure everything out yourself, there's the complete ebook, which walks you through step-by-step setup instructions along with screenshots to just kind of take the guesswork out of setting this up yourself. And finally, there's a product that I put together thinking that, had I been in my position looking at this a few years ago, would have really appealed to me, which is that I'll sit down with you and walk you through the setup yourself. And that's intended for people like I am and was, in that I knew what I had to do. I wanted to get the system in place. I knew it would save me a lot of trouble and hassle, but I just wouldn't do it. So this third product that I call the Guided Setup is for people who just need a little bit of a helping hand and actually taking the time to schedule it. And with an hour of time invested today, it'll save you hours and hours on end this year and for years to come.
Excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on to my system before we then head to Kristi's system. But thank you for that introduction, and this will be a good contrasting case study, so you can see the similarities and the differences. So a couple of things. I look at it like a holistic system, and just a couple of details also. Number one, Kristi and I covered in the book, we have a section on receipts and the details of how those kind of move through our system. So you can see that in Untethered with Evernote. And we also did a webinar that expanded upon just that part of the process, or mostly that part of the process, last year, that we'll link to in the footer here so you can get some additional information. So the approach I wanted to take in showing you guys my system today was to talk more at a systems level, more a holistic level, and show you kind of all the parts and pieces that make up my bookkeeping and tax system. So much like Chris, a big part of my system is digitizing my work. I use the Scannable app. It's an iOS app currently only, but it's brilliant. It's the best mobile scanning app I've ever used, and I use it to digitize all of my receipts and any paper that is a statement that isn't digitized in one of my other manners. It's a brilliant piece of software. I advocate highly downloading it now if you haven't done so already. I also, like Chris, use FileThis. That's what this icon is, the orange one here. I use the Evernote's email functionality, and I've signed up for e-billing to make sure that everything's digitized that can be digitized right from the beginning. And this section I have designated by just one icon to show that I'm not really sharing this part of the process with anyone in terms of permissions and people who access it. This is kind of on me, but it's very minimal, as Chris has pointed out. It's about the making sure that the process to set things up is and get them digitized is feeding into Evernote. I also have invoicing and bookkeeping software. I use FreshBooks and iBank. Many people might use QuickBooks. It's certainly interchangeable. You could do both of these features with one piece of software. But this is a collaborative role where I use permissions to give other support roles access to my part of the system, whether it be a bookkeeper or my CPA. And then over on the right, I have my banking services, which also play a role. I use my mobile bank app to deposit checks or transfer funds. If you have other accounts such as PayPal or Stripe, you just have to keep in mind all the places that money is being housed and flowing through. And again, based on business level tiers, I can have a bookkeeper or my assistant accessing those elements, and e-billing again is a key element that I've made sure that I've signed up for in all of those. And all of these things tend to not only talk to each other, but they also, most importantly, feed to Evernote. And within Evernote, I have a series of notebooks. I have more notebooks than Chris does, and I'll show you those in a second. But I have different permissions set for different notebooks depending on who I need to access what part of the process. So some are just for my use, and others are for the use of my bookkeeper, and others I share with my CPA. So this is kind of the overview, and all of the things kind of ebb and flow to each other, but the key element that is, much like Chris, Evernote's my database that is in the middle of the process. So what I wanted to tell you is how I apply the 4 core elements of Evernote specifically to this process. The first is, obviously we have notes, notebooks, stacks, and tags, and this is how I deploy them in this particular workflow. So an individual note represents for me a single receipt statement or tax document. I group those notes into notebooks, which I use to really track the phase or the status of my bookkeeping process. So I have multiple notebooks which tell me if something is like kind of incoming and needs to be processed versus if it's already been verified and reconciled, and ultimately if it's archive information for me. And that's mostly in the receipt side of the process. I then organize my notebooks into stacks, and I tend to have 2 stacks, one that manages the ongoing bookkeeping on a day-to-day basis, and another which is an archive purpose for tax reference. And then I do use tags. This is one of the processes in my system where I do use tags. This provides a role for designating if receipts are either business or personal. So Chris tends to have 2 notebooks. I tend to have 2 tags, either business or personal, so that I have my receipts retrievable that way. It also allows me to quickly be tagged with questions that my bookkeeper has, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So this is a screenshot of my 2 stacks that I have. You can see I have a few more notebooks than Chris, but as he recommended, for the different businesses, I have different notebooks. So I have one for business, I have one to segregate out the Untethered with Evernote expenses, and then for me, I have found that cash receipts were a little bit of a stickler for me to track. I wasn't doing a really good job with that, so segregating those out helped me. They certainly don't have to be segregated out, but I found that useful. And then you'll notice that I have kind of an incoming processed notebook name that allows me to track that it's something that's being brought into the system versus something that's being referenced in the tax archive. And so I go into these in more detail in the book, but you'll see that you can reference this slide if you're looking to set up a similar structure for yourself. I also, again, really want to point out that there's a couple notebooks here, key and questions. Actually, when we're dealing with a process where you have people that are integrating with you on it and collaborating with you, it's really helpful to have documented systems and places to put questions. So I designated a notebook, which really kind of helps me to do that. And then taking it into a little more detail, this is an actual screenshot of my raw scans folder, which is my first location that all of my data that needs to be processed goes into. And I just wanted to show you the different ways that I apply those parts of the system. So the first thing is I obviously have a note here, which is a receipt that has been scanned using Scannable. So I was at Bristol Farms, and I actually photographed the receipt right there before I even left the store. The second thing is you can see my notebook structure over here, which mirrors those, so they're kind of moving things through here, and they're shared with different people. So my tax documents or my 1099s and all the things that my CPA needs, he doesn't need all of my receipts unless there's a question or a problem or an audit. So I segregate those out from the tax document, which is the notebook that's shared with him. The third thing is I told you I use tags here. So we've got the, in this case, my bookkeeper actually had a question for me. She wasn't clear if this was business or personal. Oh, sorry about that. Business or personal. So she tagged a question and she wrote me a note here in the subject line so that I can go back and do a find or have a saved search for the questions and answer those and just clear them as we move through the process. Okay, so that's kind of how I use the 4 elements to organize my Evernote around my taxes and bookkeeping. And then I want to focus again here on this key and questions notebook. I found one of the things that was holding me up was that I didn't remember the details about how I wanted my bookkeeping done. So I just decided to document them in kind of a rules and an organization. So I have a Google Wallet account, and I decided, okay, I'm only going to use that for personal expenses. So I wrote that down, and it's a communication and training opportunity for my bookkeeper as well. I made notes about how I wanted certain transactions documented in my iBank software, you know, and I wrote them up between general rules versus things I have to do at the end of every month, or I want my bookkeeper to do at the end of every month, as well as things that I need to have happen at the end of the year. And just centralizing these things in OneNote has proved immensely helpful because I have a place to go back and reference to allow for consistency of data entry, and especially as team members come and go. And then the other thing is I use it to actually track one of these. This has been such an awakening, and I know Kristi really can identify with this because we've talked about it, but the amount of documents that we track, the amount of bank accounts that I'm tracking, especially in a modern world where we're taking online payments for various things, and all of a sudden I have PayPal and Stripe and Square Up and my bank, and it's just like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to track all this? So I made this table in Evernote that documented all of the places that I needed to make sure had reconciled receipts. And you can share this with your bookkeeper, or you can use it as your own tool to kind of keep up on your management throughout the year. And this one document made a huge difference in how comfortable I felt knowing where I was in the process and minimizing the amount of stress I feel right before tax time, because you can keep up with it and know where it's at throughout the year. So that's kind of my overview system. I put this table together to just kind of show you what tools I use throughout it and what role those play in the process. And as you saw, Chris adapted that for his system so you could have an apples-to-apples comparison, and Kristi's done the same, I believe, so that you can see how our systems vary and what role they play, and then who I give access to for that part of the software, whether it's no one else, my bookkeeper, my CPA, or my assistant. So you could decide, you know, hopefully if you do use a bookkeeper or you don't, you can figure out how you need to adapt the system for yourself. And then in terms of scanning, I actually have converted entirely to using Scannable. I have no need to use anything that is a more physical piece of hardware than that. So other than that, it's all covered in that chart. So that's my system. And if you have any questions, you can ask them in the pod. I don't know if Chris or Kristi have anything they want to add to that.
I don't. But I guess it's my turn to
take
add on.
That's right.
Let me, great. So, and again, if y'all have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A pod. And I will, sorry, get us caught up here. Apologize, meant to have us there already. Google is not playing nicely with me today, so I apologize to everybody. For whatever reason, I have made Google angry. It's kicked me out of the Hangout already today, and so I'll just do the best I can with this, and hopefully we'll all stick together on and I have, as far as notebooks go, I have a few more notebooks than Chris, but I have fewer notebooks than Stacey, so I guess I'm kind of the Goldilocks today. And I also use some different tools. So like Chris, I do use Expensify. I'm also using Zen Payroll to pay my part-time employee, Lillian, who is our production manager and helping us with all of our technology today on this Hangout. I use FreshBooks for my invoicing and bookkeeping, so keeping up with all my expenses and things through there as well. And then I'm digitizing also with Scannable, which I love, and is a great app. Now, I do tend to get more paper than Scannable can really handle for me, so I am still using a physical scanner as well. And after installing the Evernote ScanSnap for a client this week, I am getting one for myself, which I've been promising myself for a year since it came out, but it's happening. That thing is so fast and so great, so it's happening. So I'll be able to scan things more quickly. I also digitize by emailing things to Evernote, as well as I've recently set up a rule in If This and That I'll show you in a minute that looks through my email for anything that says receipt and sends it to Evernote as well. It's kind of my backup, last ditch, just make sure it all gets in there. And then, like Stacey, I'm using PayPal as well as Square and some other things to collect money from folks and being able to get those into Evernote. So again, as with everything in my life, if you've been in these Hangouts before, my sole goal is just get it into Evernote, and then from there, I'll know I'll be in good shape. Do a little bit differently. If you've participated in our expense and receipts Hangout last year, some of this may be a little bit of a review for you. But I am using Expensify to do a couple of things. I use it to pay employee expenses. I also use it to track my mileage. I like the map feature in it. It makes it really easy for me to keep up with my mileage. And so, for example, when Lillian has receipts that needs to be reimbursed, she goes and enters them in Expensify. It emails me a report that I can pay electronically, which I love. And then I can export the expense report to Evernote so that I have it in there for a permanent reference. And so I've really enjoyed using the Expensify and Evernote integration to and this is just another example of what that looks like. This is for me. This is the mileage report that I send myself every month. Again, it's just I really like the format of the mileage tracking, the fact that I can put in 2 destinations in the map and it'll figure out the mileage for me, and that report to Evernote. A process that I've just recently started using, I just needed something as my sort of last ditch. Let's make sure that we got all these receipts into Evernote. I'm pretty good about emailing them into Evernote, but sometimes I miss one. And so I love If This Then That. And I saw that somebody else had a recipe on there to email receipts to Evernote, and I thought that is genius. So I set it up for myself. And that makes sure that anything that has the word receipt in there ends up in Evernote. Sometimes it grabs some things that I don't want, but for me, I'd rather delete the notes from Evernote than have them not get in there. So I have them go to my inbox. I clean out my inbox in Evernote every week, and so I can make sure that I have that information. I also, like Stacey, use a multiple notebook system. I put my receipts that need to be reconciled in a notebook that I've brilliantly named, Receipts to Reconcile. You'll notice I use the dot at the beginning so that it would sort up to the top of my notebook stack because it's one that I'm in all the time. And then I go through that notebook once a week and I cross-reference it with FreshBooks and go through and make sure that the receipt is in there, and if it's not, I will go at it. I categorize it in FreshBooks, and then I tag it with the same category in Evernote. I then move that note to my notebook for that year of all my receipts for that year. I have different tags for my personal versus my receipts, so I just put everything in one notebook rather than split it up, and that works for me. Again, depending on where you live in Texas, we don't pay state income tax. I have a separate notebook for those things, but for some people they want their personal and their professional split up. But I just use the tag system to do that for me. So note comes into that receipts to reconcile. I cross-reference it with FreshBooks, categorize it, tag it, move it to the annual receipt notebook. And there it goes. There's my annual for last year. Now we've got a new one. And then I also, if it is something that's billable to a client, I have a tag for that in Evernote, so I can keep up with those. And then I make sure that I am assigning those to the client in FreshBooks. And that way when the client pays their bill, I can see that that's been done. And of course, then I can move that to that year's tax notebook in Evernote. And like Stacey, I thought a little tool overview would be good. So I am using Evernote Scannable and the Fujitsu ScanSnap. Right now I have the portable version, but I am getting that Evernote ScanSnap. Commitment to myself. And then the if this and that is helping me collect receipts. Evernote's where everything goes, using those online banking tools, Zen Payroll to keep up with the employee payroll. Which, again, I can produce reports and send those to Evernote, which I do. That's where Lillian can see her information, and she can save it to Evernote if she likes as well. And then we're using FreshBooks for that client invoicing, expense tracking, and time tracking. And then Expensify for logging and paying employee expenses in the mileage tracking. So that is my system. If anybody has any questions for me, I would love to entertain those. Or if Stacey or Chris have questions for me, I'd be happy to entertain those as well.
I don't have questions, but I love the fact that of the mileage thing with Expensify. That solves a problem. I track. I'm curious, Chris, how you track mileage, or if you do. But and Kristi, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, I'm going to do that right now.
And then, but for me, I've created a table in Evernote that is kind of a mileage log, basically, because I can pull that up from my phone when I reach my destination. But it's a really manual process, and I like the fact that Expensify offers you a little more automated system. I think that's good.
Yeah, and Expensify has an app as well, so you can do things on the fly. I try to remember to do that during the week. But the process I have for myself is on Fridays I go through and make sure that everywhere I went that's on my calendar is entered into Expensify, because sometimes I forget to track it. And in Texas we're in the cars a lot. For those of you who are like, why would you need to track mileage? I walk everywhere. So I use that to just double check it, and then at the end of the month I send myself that report. It's been great, and I love being able to just put in the 2 points, have the map attached. It's really fantastic.
Chris, how do you track mileage, or do you?
Actually, I guess I fall in the category of people who walks most places. That Kristi
You're so lucky.
Yeah, no, really fortunate. But in the times when I can't walk, I usually take a taxi or Uber or another car service like that. So rather than kind of mileage tracking, the expense management tracking when it comes to the receipts is really important for me. So I really like Kristi's idea about using IFTT to automate the sending of the receipts from Gmail, where I receive the Uber receipts, and getting them right into Evernote. Because right now I do that manually, but there's always that lingering fear that I'm going to forget one.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I knew what happened is I knew I had a receipt. I went into Evernote and I'm like, I guess I didn't save it in here. And at that point, trying to dig through and find it in Gmail was too much. I was having a hard time finding it. I was like, I just need a catch-all. You know, something. I'd rather have multiple copies and delete one than not have it in there, and it's really saved me.
Well, I think hopefully you found the audience has found some great value in seeing, 3 really distinct case studies that have different variables. We've got Kristi that's actually paying employees and has to track that and use some different softwares for that. Chris and I are, managing our processes in slightly different ways as well, even though our setups are more similar. You can also see, though, that common to all of these is that Evernote is at the middle.
Get it into Evernote.
Into Evernote, because then once it's digital, you have this trusted system that's in the middle that you can share or with people throughout the tax season and retain a digital archive that really makes all of this, as Chris has captured, pain-free. So with that, I'm going to switch over and give you guys a couple of our promised special offers. We are thrilled that Chris has given our audience a 20% discount off of his books and services through using the code Untethered. So if you want the system that Chris has laid out and you want to get that implemented through his tutorial, you can go to I have the URL wrong there, I apologize. It's yourtaxpainrelief.com. Yourtaxpainrelief.com. So we'll make sure that's clear in the footer when we have the replay, and use the code Untethered to get 20% off. And that'll be good no matter when you're watching this webinar. But we wanted to also contribute to that and give you, if you haven't yet purchased Untethered with Evernote and you'd like some more information about, Kristi and my process, as well as the 14 other workflows that we go through, through the end of the month, we're going to offer 20% off of Untethered with Evernote if you buy Tax Pain Relief and Untethered with Evernote together. Logistically, the process for this is you need to use a different code, Untethered Relief, and you need to initiate your purchase at yourtaxpainrelief.com. So start by buying Tax Pain Relief first, and then you'll get a quick email follow-up with a link that will allow you to purchase the Untethered with Evernote book through at the 20% discounted rate through the end of the month. Okay, so it's a little bit of a manual process. We'll email you with the coupon for that, but that's the way that it goes. Untethered Relief is how you would initiate that process over at yourtaxpainrelief.com. And then one last opportunity for you is that if you want my help in getting your system set up and running, you can get a $99 screen share session with me where I can kickstart and get your Evernote system up and running. It's however you want to spend the time, but you can go to harmonenterprises.com/get-help if you don't want to self-study and you want to just get it done. So you can book that right there on my website. It's screen share. It collaborates with my calendar, lets you pick up a date and time that works for you, and schedule the time to move forward. And we also encourage you to join our Untethered community out on the social channels. We have an ever-evolving and ongoing discussion at our Facebook group, which is going strong, and we're also on Google+, YouTube, which you can view all of the past Hangouts on Air that we've done. You can tweet us at Get Untethered or our personal Twitter handles, and obviously we're on the web as well. As mentioned, there's a whole playlist of our past Hangouts on Air, and you'll find the receipt and expense management one that's really complementary to this particular session there as well. And we'd like to invite you to save the date for our next Hangout on Air. Kristi and I do these once a month, and we're going to do March 19th. And we're going to be talking about some of the newer features in Evernote. This work chat, we get a lot of questions all the time about work chat and how Evernote sharing has really evolved. And so we're going to talk about work chat sharing and collaborative workflows, because really those are tools that allow us to better collaborate in Evernote. They are newer to the scene and have shifted around how some of those workflows happen. So we're going to kind of cover that and answer your questions, which we know are burning questions about those because we get them every single day. So we invite you to join us then. And if you need to reach Chris, here's his contact information, and I have the URL correct on this slide. I apologize about that, Chris. Yourtaxpainrelief.com or chris@yourtaxpainrelief.com, and then obviously Twitter's a great way to reach him. So we really want to thank Chris for joining us today. If you need to reach Kristi or I, here's our Twitter handles and websites. And with that, I'll leave it on this slide so that you have Chris's information, but we really thank you for joining us today, Chris.
And Chris, thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful to meet you, get to know your system, and to have you as a resource on our Google Hangout.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
It's our pleasure. So with that, go tackle your taxes, people. Tame them, and report back to us and tell us how...
With Zen. Tame them with Zen.
Tame them with Zen. Yes. I love it. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.